Welcome back. And again, I'm Laurie Anderson, the Executive Director of SFU's Vancouver campus and your moderator for today. We're very pleased you're here, and we're going to start this session with 4 ideas in 5 minutes each. These are big concepts related to innovation, and we want to start looking at these now. And we'll have 4 speakers, and at the end of the time, we'll then open the floor for your questions. And this will take us through to lunchtime. So I'm going to introduce each one of them. They'll speak, take their turns, and we told them we're not going to be fascist about the time, but we'll give them 3 or 4 extra seconds. So that's the plan. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Kieran Egan, right here from SFU. And just as an aside, Kieran was my PhD advisor, and when we began our professional relationship, he was my mentor. And by the time it finished, he was my tormentor. And we still invited him here today. Kieran Egan is a world-renowned professor and researcher at SFU's Faculty of Education and director of the Centre for Imaginative Education. Kieran is also the Canada Research Chair is a Canada Research Chair in Education. And over the course of Kieran's career, he has written over 20 books on education and gives frequent talks around the world on the future of education, educational theory, and related subjects. Some of Kieran's most recent works are The Future of Education, Reimagining Our Schools from the Ground Up, and Learning in Depth. Please welcome Kieran Egan.
Thank you. All knowledge in the undergraduate curriculum is a product of somebody's hopes, fears, passions, or ingenuity. And if we want students to learn in a manner that will make that knowledge meaningful and memorable, then we need to bring it to life for them in the context of those fears, passions, hopes, or ingenuity. Okay, that's my 5-second talk, and thank you.
No, you have 5 minutes.
Oh my God, what am I going to fill the rest of the time with? Okay. Well, I'll repeat what I've just said. All the knowledge in the undergraduate curriculum is a product of somebody's hopes, fears, passions, or ingenuity. If we want students to learn it in a manner that will make the knowledge meaningful and memorable, we need to bring it to life for them in the context of those fears, passions, hopes, or ingenuity, either in the lives and the emotions of the originators of the knowledge, or in the lives and emotions of people in whom the knowledge finds living purposes today. The agent that will enable us to do this routinely in our classes and seminars is the imagination, the great workhorse of learning. If you look at the way classes are taught at the undergraduate level, you would reasonably conclude that the instructors believe that the natural habitat of knowledge is the textbook. There is no knowledge in any textbook. There is no knowledge on the internet. There is no knowledge on the library shelves. In these places, there are codes and symbols designed to remind us of knowledge. The only place knowledge exists is in its peculiar form in human minds. Knowledge is a function of living human tissue. We have become so clever at coding this knowledge into symbolic forms that we too often forget that the symbols are not knowledge, and they are our clever way of creating reminders of knowledge. When we forget the difference, we confuse knowledge with codes and symbols, and we accept students' abilities to replicate the codes as sufficient evidence that they have acquired the knowledge. For those of us particularly who deal with schools, this way madness lies. It is important to distinguish between codes and knowledge because knowledge lives in our minds and is consequently caught up with all that other stuff in our psyches, with that such stuff as our hopes, fears, passions, and the impulses to solve problems and expand our knowledge. The great agent for gluing knowledge to codes and symbols is, you guessed it, the imagination. So to teach well at the undergraduate level, it's important to know something about how one can engage the imaginations of students. They come to class with a toolkit for imaginatively grasping the world. We can use this toolkit, or we can ignore it. If we ignore it, concentrating too much on the structures of our symbolic representations of knowledge, we ignore our best means of making knowledge meaningful and engaging to them. The imagination's toolkits change and develop as we age and learn, so we have to be sensitive to the tools of imaginative engagement that students use most energetically. On the screen, he says optimistically, you will see, in a moment, he says, even more optimistically. Da-da-dum. Nah. Da-da-da-dum. On the screen, you can see some of the tools that the SFU Imaginative Education Research Group identifies that have particular force during particular ages. And in literate societies and theoretic communities like ours, most of our students will find most accessible knowledge that is expressed in terms of the romantic and philosophic categories on the screen. Use of each set generates a somewhat distinctive kind of understanding. So in my final minute, I can't do more than just hint at how these toolkits can be used by undergraduate instructors to engage the imaginations and emotions of learners. More or less randomly, let me take associating with the heroic. Nearly all students will have formed an association with some person or institution or even idea that they see as heroic. The heroic person, for example, may be the Dalai Lama or Mother Teresa or Terry Fox or Lady Gaga or Lionel Messi or an academic. Well, why do they do this? Why do they form these associations with heroic characters? When we engage with reality initially, there seems to be an awful lot of it. If it is infinitely extensive, we are infinitely insignificant. So we associate with those people or things that seem best able to overcome the threats that hem us in and that can give us some significance. The hero has the courage, wisdom, freedom, power, skill that the student lacks but wants to share. The association makes us feel more secure in a world that often seems uncontrollable. If we pause for 5 seconds, you can reflect on who your hero is, okay? Reflect on who your hero is. So, and this will tell you something that you remain insecure about. So we're constantly looking at these things. The heroes enable us to deal with important emotions. Everything taught in the undergraduate curriculum involves some person or thing or idea that can be seen in a heroic light, and so can enable students' imaginations to better grasp the content. The hero need not be a testosterone-fueled male, but can be anything or anyone whose significance is highlighted. So everything in the undergraduate curriculum is a product of somebody's hopes, fears, passions, insecurities, ingenuity, courage, or imagination. If we hope to make it meaningful and memorable to students, we need to bring it to life in their minds via those hopes, fears, passions, and other transcendent human qualities. Otherwise, the main motivation for learning for most students will remain some distant and uncertain potential economic payoff, instead of immediate pleasure and a developing sense of wonder. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kieran. And just a reminder to all of you, please write down your questions or thoughts that you have for each of the speakers, Kieran and the other people that we have speaking now. Our next guest is one of our 2 guests from the Ontario Institute of OISE at the University of Toronto. And let me just tell you a little bit about Marlene. Marlene Scardamalia holds the President's Chair in Education and Knowledge Technologies at OISE/University of Toronto and directs iKIT, the Institute for Knowledge, Innovation and Technology, a worldwide network of innovators advancing the frontiers of knowledge building in various sectors. Her work has led to several honors and awards, including the World Award of Education for Innovation in Education from the World Cultural Council. The institute she directs received the Orion Learning Award for development of the world's first collaborative learning environment and research-based innovations in theory, pedagogy, and technology, all aimed at making citizens part of a 21st century knowledge-creating culture. Please welcome Marlene Scardamalia.
Okay. Schools have historically, Schools have historically functioned in a relatively closed information world. Textbooks and lecturers were often the sole source of academic subject matter. Now, college lecturers are liable to find their statements challenged by the information retrieved of students as they speak. The opening up of the informational world opens vast new educational frontiers. This is not a book, is a slide taken from Alan Liu. He coined the term transliteracy. He argues that long forms of shared attention, the scholarly book is a prime example, are giving way to short forms. The tweet is an extreme example. Transliteracy points to greatly expanded literacy challenge. It goes beyond multiliteracy, the use of many media, to the challenge of creating coherent knowledge out of fragmentary information in the world. Here's a quantitative analysis of the history of 19th century British novelists. Now we zoom in on William Wordsworth. Students in this new informational world must now do for themselves much of the epistemic heavy lifting that well-crafted textbooks and lectures once did for them. The social web and learning management systems provide scant support for this new challenge. And of course, education was not built to foster knowledge creation. Indeed, we've not done very well by traditional literacies, let alone the newer literacies. Our new goal, then, is to engage all students in the creative, collaborative knowledge work previously reserved for scientists and scholars in the academic disciplines, but now essential for everyone to engage in. The first challenge, bring ideas to the center of knowledge work. Here's a student's idea. Her theory about a question raised in the playground. Why do leaves change color in the fall? This child, in grade 1, has this idea living in a community space alongside ideas of others. It has a public life. It can be read. It can be compared to the ideas of others. Multimedia are used to express ideas. These students are working in a transliterate world. Their collective design challenge, idea improvement. I'm now going to take you on a very quick tour of barriers that can be broken under such conditions. 7 months later, these children were at a maple tree farm, and the sap, they noticed, was clear, not green as they predicted. My theory must be wrong. I'd like to argue this is grade 1, this is abstract reasoning, this is theory development and sustained creative work with ideas. They're capable, they need the environments to support the work. This is another visualization of their knowledge space. You notice the child says, my theory. They can see, oh, we have lots of theories. We have lots of things marked I need to understand. Oh, we hardly have any evidence at all. What's important is these students, seeing their knowledge space reconstructed, can say, oh, we don't have enough evidence, and realign themselves as a community committed to finding the evidence they need. Here's another aspect of what young students, I'm now up to grade 2, are able to do. So they can work in these complex worlds and find promising ideas. So they take an idea, and with an extremely simple tool, they just highlight ideas that they think are promising. And then they get to discuss these ideas and try to determine which of these ideas are so promising that they're worth more of our time. Students working under these conditions shift from a notion that the best thing to learn in school are facts to the thing to work on are ideas with potential for knowledge growth. Okay, so now what does this have to do with higher education? I suggested in our courses and research we consider a collective design challenge, pedagogies and technologies to extend the limits of the possible in education, to realize the potential of the open information world in each of our disciplines. Putting our knowledge together, we need to shift from the flat plane of ideas that surrounds our curricula and our technologies to environments where students are agents of idea improvement, where we rise above to find connectedness across knowledge-building communities and across the world.
Thank you, Marlene. This warning we give all our speakers, they're just following it to a T. Their punctuality is incredible. So thank you both very much. Our next speaker is another one of SFU's professors, Janet Moore. Janet is the director and associate professor at SFU's Semester in Dialogue. She has imagined, designed, and facilitated intensive interdisciplinary courses that focus on community engagement, resilience, lifestyle activism, food systems, group processes, and urban sustainability. Janet is the co-founder and co-director of SFU's City Studio, an energetic hub of learning and leadership where students design and implement greenest city solutions in collaboration with the City of Vancouver and the 6 other post-secondary institutions in the region. Please welcome Janet Moore.
Hello. So I'm the director of the Semester in Dialogue, as Lori mentioned, and I'm here because of Mark Winston, who's sitting at this table here, who imagined the Semester in Dialogue, and he had a vision for students that when you graduated with your degree, that you also would have this idea of how you would make an impact in the world. And so he created the Semester in Dialogue 10 years ago to do just that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what happened to me when I was teaching in the Semester in Dialogue. So it is 20 students. They come from all the disciplines at the university. They come together for 12 weeks. They get 15 credits, and they were there 9 to 3:30 every day of the week. It's a cohort. That cohort builds trust amongst them. They become fabulous friends for life, most of them. And this is a really important piece because it combats what we hear a lot about anxiety, depression, isolation that's happening at the university. We also co-teach with community members, which is another different thing. We're co-teaching. It allows us to take risks in the classroom, and we're often doing that with community members, people without PhDs. And we don't lecture. We sit in dialogue, and dialogue, many people think, is about learning how to talk better, but what we find is it's actually about learning to listen. And so being in dialogue allows you to see yourself in the group, and allows you to see perspectives that you might not have thought of or heard about before, and actually hear the other person speak. So the idea is that through really understanding diverse perspectives, we can go out into the world and figure out ways to be with one another and make change in the world. And that change happens for the students. It's quite transformative, but it's also for the instructors. And so for me, sitting in dialogue circles semester after semester, I started to think, what else can I do in my teaching? I think I can actually make a bigger impact here. And I was sitting with the city councilor one day, and she said, that we could do a lot more with these amazing students. We don't get to hear their voices enough. And so I created, with Dwayne Elverum, who's not here today, City Studio 4 years ago. And whoa, it's gone. Look at that. Try again. Next slide. Suggestions. Oh, we just had it there. There it is, City Studio. It's an innovation hub inside City Hall. It's a collaboration of the 6 public post-secondary institutions in Vancouver with the City of Vancouver. Collaboration is one of the core values. And that students are not co-op, they're not interns, they're co-creating projects with city staff. And this is a really different model. Everyone asks, whose ideas are these projects? And it's really key to know that these is an ongoing dialogue and design thinking kind of process that we bring in to co-create projects where the students need to land on the ground in one semester. And we have some of our students here today. Hands up, guys. They're right in the middle of project process. We took them here for the day. So we added the elements of design thinking and adventure into the dialogue program. It also has a partner network of courses, and Lena Suits, amazing Lena Suits, is here today. She can tell you all about the partner network where faculty can connect with city staff, stay on the home institutions, and engage with projects. So we've really gotten out into the city, and that my big idea is that we've left the building. It matters that we've left the building, and that the projects are real. They're not case studies, they're not imagine if, they're not case competitions, they're actually real projects with real community members on the ground in a 12-week process, which is actually 8 weeks to land a project. So some of these things we've launched, you may know us for the public pianos last summer, 10 public pianos painted by local artists. The whole project budget was about $5,000. The city said if we did this, it would have cost $200,000 and we would have ruined it. They would have had graffiti all over them. Other things like we're building community garden sheds with the architecture students at UBC. We have a food share project designed. We have our students can tell you about their outdoor learning in public parks, placemaking, mural making. And the really important piece of this, the city's always saying, is this project going to change the world? And the idea is that if this is possible, what else is possible? So for a student in 12 weeks that lands a project they can take their parents and take a picture of, what else could they do to make change in the world? And so 2 weeks ago, Dwayne Elverum and I were at Waterloo speaking to a group of the National Conference of Vice President Academics. And I got a question that I'd never got asked before, which was, who let you do this? And I thought this was really relevant for a conversation around innovation, which was that there were so many people who took risks to allow this to happen, and that many of them are my mentors. John Driver, who, as a vice president academic, saw that this is important, that we need to put space towards these kinds of initiatives, and John Waterhouse before him for supporting the semester in dialogue. There were people at the city, so really progressive mayor and council, and that's in a sense thinking about who are our change makers in community. And there were city staff who put their necks out, and they do every day for us. Like, we're gonna do this thing, and we're doing it because we're collaborating, and we don't know, we've never done this before. Will you go in with this on us? The students take a risk, and the students show up. The faculty take a risk by engaging in a project. You show up at a class, and you don't know what your curriculum is going to be because you don't have your project yet. Really important, I think, for innovation, that we have leadership that acknowledges that importance of creating space for these kinds of new programs. And I think what that space is when you connect people with purpose, with passion, with skills, and with resources, that all of these things can happen. So really important piece. To get the big ideas on the ground, we need good leadership. So thank you.
Thank you, Janet. And our last speaker in Ideas in 5 is another guest from the Ontario Institute of Education, Tony Chambers, who's the Associate Professor of Higher Education and the Director of the Centre for the Study of Students in Post-Secondary Education in the Department of Leadership, Higher and Adult Education at OISE. Tony, prior to serving at the University of Toronto as Vice Provost in 2005, worked at the University of Michigan, where he was the Associate Director of the National Forum on Higher Education for the Public Good, and an adjunct associate professor in the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education. Tony has written extensively on the subject of reforming post-secondary education. He was an editor on Higher Education for the Public Good, Emerging Voices from a National Movement, and wrote Towards a Social Justice-Centered Engaged Scholarship, a Public and Private Good. Please welcome Tony Chambers.
Thank you. I just want to start off by acknowledging our good buddies down at ASU. And for those who get the Globe and Mail, this was an insert in there yesterday on innovations and higher educations in Canada, and they acknowledged our folks from the South down at ASU, so I want to give a shout out to you guys. Now this is going to be challenging. How did you get this thing?
Escape from the phone.
Okay.
And then there should be a file with you underneath.
Okay, they hid me underneath somebody else's stuff. Is that me? Okay.
Click on that. And then you have to go up to
Oh, go up.
and then go to a slideshow.
Okay. Perfect. I have 3 sons, and my 3 sons, one is a mixed martial artist, so they put him in cages and they fight until the death. And the other son is an accomplished jazz trumpeter, very committed to his art. And my 3rd son is a competitive athlete, so he plays hockey and all other things that hurt you when you fall on your head. So I was thinking about what I was going to say today, because there's a lot of thoughts roaming around in my head, and 5 minutes is not a lot of time. So what I thought almost at the last minute was a learning, and you could just exchange learning for life, but learning really is a contact sport. That's the way we live our life, and that's the way I work with my students, and that is the overall lesson for any comments that I make from this point on, so you could go to sleep if you want from this point on. Learning is a contact sport. So why is it a contact sport and not a spectator sport for undergraduates in particular? Because they have to do something in order to engage in active and optimal learning. It's engaging, as the signs say right here. It's relevant. In other words, it connects to something that's personally committed, personally important to the learner as well as the learner, the learned, and what is learned is relevant. It's important. It's not secondary. It's not a la carte. It's reflective. People think about what it is that they care about. They think about what it is that's important to them. And if they learn and they care about what they learn, they reflect on it and reflect on it and reflect on it. It's relational. It's not done alone. And when I say alone, I don't necessarily mean with other people. I mean they engage in relationship with the subject matter. They engage in relationship with the problem du jour. They engage in a relationship with their own thoughts about it. And yes, they engage in relationship around learning with other people. And all of our discussion has tried to address that. So it is an engaging sport. It's a contact sport. There's constant contact with what it is that one is learning and the learner and the learning environment. One of the high contact learning innovations that I'm most familiar with, and one that I think is probably one of the most important learning innovations or social innovations of our time in post-secondary education, at least over the last several decades, has been this idea of service learning. Many of you all know what that is. But for those who don't know what it is, let me just give you a quick snapshot of what I think service learning is. Service learning, at least according to the literature and according to what we think we know about service learning, is somewhat of an approach, a teaching learning approach, that connects meaningful community service outside of the institution, with instruction and reflection, and it enriches the learning experience and some degree of civic knowledge and responsibility. And most important, at least for me, it vitalizes or strengthens the community in ways that the community defines what it needs, not in what the institution or the learner define what's needed. The critical difference and distinguishing characteristic of service learning is that there's this reciprocal and balancing emphasis on both students learning and addressing community-inspired needs. So it's bringing the learning process to life by connecting it to something that's relevant to students, reflecting on it, and then building on it some more. So what do we know about the impact of service learning based on the scholarship and activities? We know that those who are involved in service learning, particularly as it relates to non-engaged community activities or in relation to community volunteerism, academic students tend to do better in their courses, grade-wise. They also engage in what we call deeper learning as opposed to surface learning. They learn to know. They learn to raise questions and to be critical. They don't learn just to pass, which some of us know all too clear from our students sometimes. They engage during their university time as well as post-university time in higher level civic activities. They read more newspapers, right? They engage in more political campaigns, for better or for worse. They engage in more activist behavior, again, for better or for worse. They question public and social activities to a larger degree than students and those of us who don't engage in either any kind of community-based activity or in just service activity, which is also very important as well. Personally, they take better care of themselves health-wise. They question some of the information they receive about how best to eat, how best to invest their time in sleeping, how best to participate in social and outside activities. They develop deeper relationships with other people, which has been known, at least in some studies, to correlate highly with being more open-minded in terms of multiculturalism or cultural competencies, in terms of mathematical computational competencies, in terms of many of the outcomes that we wish for our graduates of our institutions over the long haul. These outcomes also are sustainable, and they look very much the same 3, 6, and 10 years out of post-secondary education. So there's some lasting effect for participation in some of these type of activities for the students. For the communities, the verdict is still out in terms of the sustainable effect of participation in service learning. We're currently involved in a few other studies. How much time do I have? Okay, 1 minute. And again, this top one, I just wanted to say, it's in a culture, looking at international students and how service learning addresses acculturation, and that's being done with a former graduate of Quest University. Thank you very much, Quest, for giving us that one. Other ones, we're looking at other kind of psychosocial and cognitive outcomes of participation in service learning as a social innovation. I did want to say one last thing before I move on, because I have 30 seconds. I was told that we're going to do interviews after this, and I was going to be asked a question about the 3 changes Canadian post-secondary institutions can make today to support undergraduate student-centered learning. And I thought I'd share it with you all before I shared it with them all. At the top of my list, and this is in reverse order, we need to have longer periods, more flexible learning periods. A semester does not do it based on what we know about learning. 13 weeks, 14 weeks, we need to stretch the clock in order to give optimal learning for undergraduates. Second of all, we need to use learning outcomes to assess access. This is important because what we typically do when we admit students is that we use high school grade point average or high school performance, and for some of us, performance on SATs or aptitude tests to demonstrate some level of competencies to carry on. Imagine if we started with the outcomes that we expect students to achieve when they graduate: computational competency, multicultural literacy, critical thinking. If we assess students' entry on the things that we expect them to get when they go out, what then would we be producing, as opposed to grade point averages and marks on tests? Imagine the kind of people we'd be producing and the kind of learning environment we'd be creating for undergraduates if we looked at the end of what we expected and assessed access on those. And finally, extend the boundaries of campus. We've talked about it a little bit, and not just restricting learning to the walls or to the physical structure of what we now call the university campus. That includes distance, online learning, but it also includes community-based learning and also includes plan or assessment and valuing of prior learning for all of our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. All right, we've got time for questions from people, and we're looking forward to your questions. At the risk of oversimplifying what our 4 guests said, here's a brief summary in 30 seconds or less. Kieran spoke obviously about the pivotal role that the imagination plays in student learning. Marlene spoke about the importance of helping students build their capacity to generate theories and develop ideas. And Janet spoke about a program at SFU City Studio that is collaborative, relevant, and problem-based or project-based learning involving many different post-secondary institutions. And finally, Tony spoke about the relational dimension of learning, and in particular, the value, the sustained value of service learning. So questions to any one of the guests. I'll give them the microphone when you have a question. All right, the fellow at the back, you have a question? Yeah, we'll give you this one. Here you go.
Thank you. I'm Robert Luke. I'm from George Brown College in Toronto. I took a course with Marlene for my PhD, maybe 10 or so years ago. Really nice to see you here. I'm really interested in this idea of learning outcomes. I have to do that interview as well. And actually, learning outcomes is the one innovation I think that education has really articulated well. Colleges in Ontario, at least, have to do learning outcomes. It's part of our mandate as wards of the state. And I'm really pleased that universities are doing that as well. I happened to read SFU's academic plan on my way here, and it states that a goal of the Vice President Academic is to have learning outcomes stated for all academic programs at the university. And I think that's great. So here's my question. I'm biased, obviously, towards learning outcomes. I've heard that some in the post-secondary education world are against learning outcomes because it impinges on academic freedom. So I'm interested in how we would articulate that, an argument against that, because university professors don't want to be told how to teach or what to teach necessarily. So how do we give students, for example, the students in the Simon Fraser University program that Janet talked about? I happened to talk to your student downstairs because I asked her the question, what did you get out of this program? So how do we articulate learning outcomes across the post-secondary education environment while trying to overcome the resistance to it?
Yes, who'd like to answer that one? And while I'm walking up here, I know you all read SFU's academic plan on the way up here, so just to be clear. Who would like to attempt to answer that question? Marlene, do you want to start? As a former student of yours.
We never talked about this. This is a reflection about learning outcomes. I served on the large assessment and teaching for 21st century learning, the large initiative that Cisco, Intel, Microsoft put together to identify learning outcomes and design tests. And the one thing that really hit me was the difference between learning outcomes conceived as fixed point in a trajectory of learning versus what I think is so important for the era that we live in, which is the emergence of new competencies. So when we keep fixing the point we want students to get to and then chart their way to that point, we also undercut the possibility for emergence of new competencies. So I too am in favor of learning outcomes. I'm in favor of how you get there. I'm also very much in favor of making students agents of those outcomes so that they understand where they are in that course, but also not with so many technologies designed to chart their course to that outcome, but to let them exceed the outcomes. That is, they have discourse about and around the outcomes. So I think the emergence of new competencies needs to be juxtaposed against learning outcomes if, in fact, we're going to create modern contexts for assessment.
If I could just add to that, if you don't mind, I think learning outcomes without knowing learning expectations is a bad exercise, for sure. If we don't know what students and what we expect students to learn, then to just assess it at some summative level versus have it as a formative process is a waste of time, quite honestly, I have to say. And oftentimes we, and particularly in Ontario, we use certain type of learning outcomes in our KPIs as key performance indicators as ways to assess the quality of an institution. And I think that's an inaccurate way to use outcomes, learning outcomes. It should be diagnostic and help us build the best learning environments for students and not be punitive. That's my 30-cent take on it.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Okay, all right. Shauna?
My name is Shauna Jones. I'm with the Beatty School of Business here at SFU. And I'd like, Tony, if you could expand on some of the things that you're finding with the acculturation of
International students.
Yeah, with the international students.
Real quickly, because we haven't analyzed all the data. What we're finding preliminarily is that, well, let me just say, the reason why we did this is because our province, much like your province, is interested in experiential education, and mostly around work-based experiential education, co-ops, internships, the things that lead to jobs. And what we try to tell our province is that there are other things that matter in post-secondary education as well, like serving society, the economic or the social economy versus the economic, or in relation to the economic economy. So what we wanted to know, particularly since international students are being lauded as sort of the cash cow, of some post-secondary institutions these days, we wanted to know if this social-based innovation contributes to them feeling wanted at an institution, feeling like they've integrated in some degree at the institution or contribute to others' integration at an institution. And what we're finding out is that in relation to some of the other experiential learning activities, co-ops, internships, et cetera, practicums, service learning sounds like it appears as though it's contributing more largely to their acculturation, their sense of being and belonging in place, more so than some of these other initiatives.
All right. Other questions? Right. To the back. Brian, I'll give you the microphone.
Great. Thank you. Curious, traditional learning is certainly in secondary, and then in higher ed is fairly siloed. Like you take courses and you learn courses independent from other courses for the most part. And what are your thoughts on shifting to interdisciplinary learning, perhaps mostly project-based, authentic, because it ties into the service learning and imagination, all those kinds of things, but make it real-world, interdisciplinary, so that if you're working on physics and you have to write a report, maybe perhaps you can get credit in an English course or whatever, so that it's more efficient as well for students. Perhaps they're not, having to do as much work and learning more.
So the question is, where does interdisciplinary fit in the undergraduate curriculum? Is that so? All I can speak of is that I think that there's room for more capstones that are interdisciplinary, and that's a great starting point. I think the question of general studies is, I think we can look to see if that's been helpful for a lot of people. But I do think having a capstone experience that allows you to have an interdisciplinary experience and to connect it to something that's real is where I see huge value. We ask our students on the first day where they're from in terms of and I lose very quickly who's the scientist and who's the historian and who's the international studies, because they also bring out other sets of skills that are not at all connected to disciplines, that in fact are sometimes more relevant, whether they can, are artists or musicians or have passion for a place in their community. So those sorts of identities, I think, we need to bring out. This idea that an undergraduate is their discipline is a bit of a problem, I think.
Yes, Marlene, you have a point on that. You can use the microphone on the podium.
Yeah, this notion of having students' ideas at the center of the interactions, what we've learned over the years of doing this is when students have ideas, other students build on each other's ideas, they just go deeper and deeper into the discipline. They oftentimes get beyond what the teacher knows well, and they are fundamentally in an interdisciplinary context. That is, they're coming at this from so many different vantage points that we're seeing real, talking about service, we've been trying to put together undergraduates with young students who can help in the advancement of ideas. But my point is, it's a fundamentally interdisciplinary enterprise. Like to go deep is to go across the curriculum in unexpected ways. So I think you're really touching on something that is really essential for turning around the blocks and courses that we have. And if you let ideas, imagination, service start to define what's happening, it will be fundamentally interdisciplinary.
Thank you, Marlene. And then we have a question here, Beth.
Thank you. I want to bring up the ugly word. I'm an instructor, assessment. So all these amazing, innovative ideas and allowing students to grow, and I teach international students as well. Assessment is key. And if you talk to administrators that need to have, the outcome-based, but you need a grade. I worked on a curriculum project where we were trying to get rid of grades and just looking at more not a summative, but a formative assessment. It's difficult. And so I'm just curious as to anybody to take this role or on about assessment. Is it a dirty word?
I'm just
One
gonna say,
speaker at a time,
I'll just say
please.
one thing, that in my class, it is small, but what we say really quickly to the students is what matters most is probably you getting a really good reference from one of us or from a city staff, and that sort of trumps everything to do with grades. And so the ability, and I think more and more the culture of how we recommend people and how that conversation goes is so much more important than grades. And so if a student can actually access someone who they can have a recommendation from, and do we have a setup, like how are the universities set up so that students can have that experience, and that becomes much more important. So that difference between an A and an A minus, we'll have long conversations about what that means and what they need to improve on, but in the end it's like, do I want to recommend you for a job or for a master's program? And that's a bigger way to think about it.
Another take we've had on that is that students, when they're working to advance a goal, but doing that collectively, is that they are evaluated on the basis of the contributions they make to that collective goal. So it's a bit the same as referencing the service, it's the contributions to the community. But we've very much tracked on a lot of knowledge-based pre-post tests, so traditional assessments and then international standardized tests. Is there ability to contribute to a community and advance the ideas of the community? We found it has the highest predictive value for how well they'll do on tests, because in fact to contribute, they've got to read and understand the ideas, the different ideas, they've got to advance those ideas. So these kind of proxies for intense engagement with ideas, I think that we as a community are going to have to show, do they actually chart against major PISA and international assessments, because the world does want to see that. So I'm very much with you in needing to look at that. But I think once we can start showing that these other kinds of ways of engaging students are what will get you those kinds of advances plus more.
Yeah, my quick response is it depends on what you want to know, and who wants to know it, and what's the anticipated outcome. If it's a community that's assessing, they want to know so they can continue to get funded for whatever activity they're doing. If it's a student, yeah, they want a grade, but then there's another form of assessment, and that is, can it advance the learning process? So there may be need for multiple forms of assessment, and it may take the form of standardization, it may take the form of sort of idiosyncratic sort of assessment. So it depends on what you want to know, why you want to know it, who wants to know it, and then you build your suite of assessment tools around those kind of responses. So again, it's not a one size fits all by any stretch.
Thank you, Joanne. Our last question, John.
Thanks. First of all, thanks to everybody who contributed. This maybe I could include Robert in this. Robert's still here. Yes, he is. He just came back. In this question as well, there's lots of great ideas out there about creating deep learners rather than shallow learners, engaged learners, and in fact thinking about university education as the place where people learn to become effective learners. How do we encourage our colleagues in the faculty who have amazing pressures on them to be research intensive, to contribute to service activities, and are often in many cases unsure about how to change the way they teach. How could people in positions like the provost incentivize faculty members to take a different approach to teaching?
Marlene, go for it.
Okay, maybe we give you all an opportunity as a closing to make a comment or close on another point. Okay.
I've recently, and for the first time in decades, had the privilege of working with the Ontario Ministry of Education in the Principals Councils. So it's the first time I've known of innovations where actually administrators are engaged in talking with them and all of us about the pros and cons, how are we going to demonstrate the results, what is it that we as a community have to do to get the results. What kind of comfort zone do leaders need to provide for those who want to take a shot at this, but are also very, very worried that they'll do worse instead of doing better? So just to tell you, I've been really deeply impressed with what it means to have a community of administrators, teachers, students, the community trying to make the change, actually working together and discovering what's wrong, where we need to put more help and resources. But anyhow, I think having administrators help make the change is the fundamental issue.
I have nothing to say. You're not paying me enough to answer these questions. Sorry. It's above my grade scale, or whatever the phrase is. Look, I mean, all I care about is that at the end of their undergraduate experience, more students read Jane Austen, okay? And I don't care much about the rest. And we're not doing that very well. I think you might educate your faculty. You know, a best-selling book of poetry in Canada sells maybe 400 or 500 copies. This is disgraceful as a statement about the effectiveness of our educational institutions. How you're going to deal with that is not my problem. But I think we, looking at all the statistics and the producing more satisfying industry, et cetera, is indeed important because that's how we get paid. But at the same time, if we forget what the purpose of the whole enterprise is about, becoming a richer, better human being, then we're flogging a dead horse.
Follow that.
Better you than me.
I think I said it in my talk that I really believe in the model of co-teaching. I've only ever co-taught, and I remember an experience where we were 4 institutions were put down at Great Northern Way, and they said, you're going to teach a course on sustainability. This is about 10 years ago, and we were with someone from BCIT, someone from Emily Carr, someone from SFU and UBC, and we just sort of like, what are we going to do together? And we're from 4 different disciplines, and you can take risks because you are working together. And so, and all 4 of you in the classroom, not every day, but just sort of, wow, what if we just start here? And I think that collaboration allows you to take risks, which are needed. So how do we create more spaces? And I'm also going to say, and get off the mountain and get inside other institutions that need help, because that's what we're supposed to be up to.
Yeah. Oh, that is the $1,000 bazillion question. But in addition to doing other stuff, I chair our department, which typically is pretty large. We have about 32 full-time faculty, 30 or so contract, 1,800 students, all graduate students, and a 9-staff group. And just this morning, we had a conference call with the deans and chairs in the building. Marlene knows most of these people. And one of the questions that was asked of me on the phone was, so how do you guys in your department how do you meet student targets, enrollment targets? How do you continue to generate courses that are, and programs that are of importance to students and constantly get the kind of students that we get and are able to generate resources internally and externally the way you do when some of the other departments, actually all of the other departments this year, have not been able to do that. And my response, for whatever it was worth, was, well, I try to create a climate for the faculty that's in my department where they operate on possibility and not fear, which tends to be the modus operandi in most academic environments. I try to create a climate with all of our faculty support where they get rewarded for effort. And the reward is pretty much idiosyncratic. They pretty much tell me what they care about. So we try to build in these rewards. And I'm here to tell you it's not money. Yeah, I mean, because the amount of money we give our faculty is sometimes criminal. And those that we give our contract faculty is damn criminal. So we build a reward structure where if they perform, they get rewards. And I can't go back on that, for sure. The other thing is, we make clear, and they make clear to one another, their responsibility is to educate students, right? So we look for the best students, we mentor the best students, we try to get financial support and research opportunities and educational opportunities for the students that are part of our community. And we celebrate a lot for all the achievements and ideas that we have. So we want to create a safe space for them. So that's the only response I could offer to get faculty to engage in pretty much anything, because we don't have to do it, right?
A couple of things just before we break. First of all, we're eating lunch downstairs, and you'll have an opportunity. Oh, sorry. Excuse me, Rob. Forgive me. All right, you have. Go for it then.
Can't shut me up. Okay, quick. So, I don't know about faculty in Canada. I'm sure they're probably pretty similar to faculty in the U.S., but faculty are the most socially liberal group you'll find. But when it comes to their own, what they do for themselves and in the academy in which they are members, they're the most conservative things on earth. I mean, it's so hard to change anything within the academy. So if you want to get faculty involved in innovation, if you want to get them involved in these programs that you're building, what you have to do, and I had this experience, is I put together teams of technicians, technical people who knew how to build courses and knew how to design courses. And I went through a list of the courses that we had at ASU, at the time I was the dean of the college, in my college that I thought would really lend themselves well to particular kinds of teaching innovations. And then I sent the teams out to engage those faculty who were teaching those courses. And they worked with them, and they built those courses, like that adaptive math series of courses. There was incredible resistance to do that. But once we had people in there working with them, showing them how it worked, once we had them built, then everyone was on board. I have the opposite problem now. I have too many of these things going online. I mean, we have to define what is an immersion experience as opposed to an online experience. So I'm backing up now, and I'm trying to put standards and critical thought into what I'm allowing to be launched because we haven't assessed it. So now I have this wave of innovation taking place among the academy at ASU that I'm trying now to lasso and hold it back so that we can make it, more ordered and organized and assessed.
Thank you, Rob. Well, a couple of things. Lunch is actually served here, and the learning fair will continue downstairs. I understand a number of you are visiting our Faculty of Education's Learning Hub, and they'll be leaving here at 12:20. Second thing, I want to close once again, and I want you to join with me in thanking our four speakers, Tony, Janet, Kieran, and Marlene. Thank you very, very much.